Welcome back to the Thrive on Mission podcast. I'm Dave Jones. I'm the senior minister at the Millwood Church of Christ. And as always, with Jim Book, who is the associate director of the Christian Restoration Association. And what a blessing it's been to serve you all in the way that we have through these podcasts. And the feedback we're getting is pretty incredible. Jim, I know you've heard some good stuff.
You know, Dave, it's great. I mean, almost every day a different minister will just say, hey, thank you for you and Dave's information, or what you said really challenged me, or we're dealing with that issue right now. I got an extraordinarily uplifting email from a preacher in Virginia, rural town, very small town, but man, he's like, the podcast has really spoken to me and encouraged me. So we're just grateful that we get to be able to empower people through the word and through our experiences.
And as always, if you like what you're hearing and you feel it would benefit others in your church, other leaders in your congregation, or other ministers or elders in other churches, please like, subscribe, and share it as much as you want on YouTube, Facebook, and Spotify, and we'd be very thankful that that message is getting out there. Jim, one of the key things we've talked about in the last few weeks is the importance of not having areas in ministry that seem to bring down potential and limit our growth, overcoming some of the challenges that we face. And I think we've had some solid discussions in that realm. And there's two things we want to talk about in this episode that I think a lot of us really struggle with at times and want to overcome. But we want to overcome that tendency we have to compare ourselves, and then even dealing with criticism in the local church, negativity that can tear us down. And so it's really important for us to better understand that comparison with other people can be beneficial, but we can't let it be something that takes away the joy
Absolutely
that we have.
Absolutely. So I remember I got a phone call from a preacher one time, and he said, "Hey, you don't know me, but I've known your family." And he goes, "I'm at a little church in North Carolina. It's a very small church. We're at about 70." And he goes, "But I'm no Bob Russell. I'll tell you that." I said, "Well, hold on a second." I said, "I'm just curious. How big's your town?" And he said, "Well, we're about a town of about 300. I said, "And you run 70?" I said, "That's not quite a third of your town." But I said, comparatively speaking, per capita, you run more in your church than Bob Russell does with the church of 20,000 in Louisville. And that wasn't a slap to Bob Russell, but sometimes you just got to put life and ministry in perspective,
Yes. I've looked at churches outside of our community closer to Columbus. We're about an hour north of Columbus. We are not suburban. It's very rural. And I've got a lot of friends that preach in more suburban churches down that way. And I've watched them flourish and grow over the years, adding dozens or hundreds even in the course of a year, growing from 2 to 300 to 6 and 700. And I'm like, why can't we do that? And I've been reminded over the years that, number one, you're not in a growing area, not in a suburban area.
Right.
You're not the fastest growing county in the state of Ohio. And so we're always going to be limited at times just by our logistics and where we are. And so maybe there's areas that we just need to be realistic about in that too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I also learned that the preacher that you think has everything going for him, great staff, great numbers, if you were to sit down with him and just talk about life and church work, he would cry on your shoulder and say, "Man, there's just a lot of things you don't know that I go through every single day." So, yeah, even those that we think have it all going for them, they're going through their struggles and their trials. They've got their challenges, and like Shammah in 2 Samuel 23, he defended his bean field. I say, just get your bean field and defend it, love it, pray for it, support it, and don't compare yourself to other people, because it can destroy you is what it can do.
I love in Esther the idea that for such a time as this, God has placed you here. So God has made you who you are. He's given us the experiences that we have. We're in the locations that we are. We've got the people around us that we have, and God is going to use us in a great way in that place. And really what happens with comparison is it leads to discontentment. And we start thinking that things would be better if I could be there and if I was doing this. And I like what you said a number of weeks ago in one of our episodes, the grass is always greener over the septic tank.
It always is. So just because it looks better doesn't mean it is. You mentioned the other day, it's good to find someone that you respect and you admire, and let him mentor you or let him challenge you. But I think it needs to stop at comparison. I just think that's just a dangerous road. I mean, when people start comparing their marriage to other people, their jobs, it always leads to discontentment, you know. And I someone once told me this, I never forgot it. You had two moms, and they both have kids the same age. And one kid, they're both playing baseball. Well, one kid hits a home run, the other kid strikes out. And the mom whose kid struck out, she gets a little angry. She's not angry that her kid struck out. She's angry that her best friend's son hit a home run. So,
Yeah.
you know, sometimes our jealousy has nothing to do with the success of someone. It's that they're succeeding and we're perceived as not to succeed. And so, man, flush that out, and just be grateful for who you are and what God's doing through you.
You know, when I first became a preacher, part of what we struggled to overcome, or at least I did, was this mentality of success. And we start looking at what other churches are running numerically and the baptisms they have and the successes they have. And we wonder why we're not having that. And we just start comparing, and that leads to that spirit of discontentment. It's okay to compare, but look to churches maybe that are where you're headed. Don't look too
Right,
far down the road. Don't look at the church that's running 5 or 6,000 in a big city. Look at churches in your setting, in your community, that maybe you could make some tweaks and changes with the work you're doing and grow in those areas where those churches have. So you begin to learn from people that are maybe a step ahead of you. And I've just seen great value in that for us. For example, the first time we went to Kissimmee, the church there, when you were there, I believe was running close to 1,000 people most Sundays. And walking through the door and wondering, what's this going to be like? And I just remember that sense of thinking and seeing things that I thought we can learn from this. We can grow if we apply these principles. But there's certain areas of Kissimmee that just don't relate to the work we're doing in Millwood. You know,
right, exactly,
a
exactly.
downtown inner city ministry isn't where we are. And so
Right,
being
right.
careful to understand that the vibrancy of one church isn't necessarily the vibrancy of your church. Jim, you talk about this a lot, understanding the DNA of your community, but I think also there's a DNA of our local church and who we are too, that we have to keep in
Absolutely.
mind.
Absolutely. So, Dave, Savannah, they run this massive conference in church growth, and a lot of churches will go there. But I've actually talked to churches that leave frustrated, not because of Savannah, but they go there with this idea that we have to replicate everything they're doing, and there's no way they can. And so instead of going there and learning or going, hey, that doesn't work, or get rid of that, that might work, or let's frame it around who we are, they leave frustrated and angry. And I know one church, they fired their preacher after they got back. So I'm like,
Mm.
I know he wished he had never gone. But I thought, well, that's the problem when you compare. If you compare to learn, great. If you compare and it begins to destroy you inside, then it has failed in every facet. And I just concerned when preachers do that.
Jim, I really appreciate that you talk about the Acts model of church growth. We want to be biblical in the things that we do and not pragmatic, not just doing things for the sake of maybe that's a key to the growth that we need. Andrea and I remember years ago, we went to New York and visited a church. We were there for a wedding, and we went to church there on the Sunday morning, and they had a band on the stage, and it was probably the worst musical experience I've ever seen. And it was almost as if what this church tried to do is they said, hey, listen, growing churches have a band. We need a band. And so they went to the Goodwill, they bought drums, a guitar, and microphones, and put these people on stage that just didn't have that ability to do it. And so some of those things, that pragmatic approach, if we do this, then this will happen, isn't always true.
Oh,
Just
it,
because you're growing doesn't
yes,
mean you're fruitful either. I love what Jeff Fall
exactly.
says. We want to be a mile wide and a mile deep. And a lot
Yes.
of times when we try to grow too fast, pragmatically, we're not discipling people the way we need to. And so that's got to be a consideration along the way as well. Not only does the church have to grow numerically, more important, the church has to grow spiritually, and the individuals within the church have to be ready for the growth that's going to come
Right.
before that
Exactly.
growth does come.
Here's another way to avoid comparison is get to know the fellow ministers. if you've got a couple of Christian churches, Churches of Christ in your area, I know Dave, you're great at this. You're always fellowship because when we talk, it's like, yeah, we have a preacher down the road. I think if the healthy church in the area can love on the other guys and they can see him as not a competition, he doesn't look down on us. In fact, he's the one calling me to see how I'm doing. It creates a very favorable relationship, and all that comparison nonsense goes away, and they see you as a person who really cares for who they are and where they are. So I've always encouraged, if you're the healthiest church in the community, if you're the healthiest Christian church in your area, please take the lead to love on the other guys. Take the lead and don't patronize them, but love on them. And man, that goes a long way.
Yeah, that model there, I've heard it called the Thessalonian model. You know, in First Thessalonians, Paul writes about how that church is a model for so many
Yes.
others, and that's what we
Yes.
should strive to be. And personally, when we make connections with other preachers, ministers, I've even over the years gotten to know a lot of the elders in our community. At different churches, and where that's helped me is it's hard to be critical of and jealous of people that you love.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and I want the best for these other churches in the area. And so there it's funny because there's a church, it's maybe 15 minutes from us, a Christian church. And over the years, people left Millwood because they liked the music there better, let's say at different times, or there was an issue here. They felt they would be better suited to attend that church. And then that church sends people here too, understanding that people are going to move churches, and that's okay. And it's not because that church is better. At
Right.
times, maybe that church is just better suited for where that person is in their life. And so
Right.
even when people
Exactly.
start to go to a different church or even that bigger church in the community, that can foster some jealousy for us. And I've
Yes.
been there. And we can't let it do that. We're all on the same team. We're all fighting the same battle. Leads us to the second half of this podcast today is the mindset of criticism or negativity and how much that can really tear apart the church and defeat what we're trying to accomplish.
Yes. So obviously, Act 6, church is booming. We've used the illustration before. Gareth Reese, in his commentary on the book of Acts, believes that by the time Act 6 is written or that story develops, the church is probably close to 20,000. And so we know the church is growing considerably because Acts 2, Acts 4, but the first recorded church, I don't know, fight between two groups of widows. But what I find interesting is the apostles did not marginalize the concern. They didn't marginalize or demonize the widows. They said, okay, it's an issue, it's a crisis, it's not going to kill us, it's not going to destroy the church, but we do need to address it. And so once they resolve the issue, the Bible says the things begin to flourish again. And so here's an example of guys that could have the widows were comparing. The Greeks were saying, hey, the Hebrew widows are getting better care, so there was that false comparison. Probably wasn't really happening, but perception is 90% reality. I just appreciate the fact that the apostles didn't brush it under the rug or didn't say, hey, let the widows leave. We're growing so fast, we don't need them. No, they are part of the family, but let's stop the comparison. Let's fix the problem. And they did. And they did. And the conflict dissipated.
That's good. Comparison kills joy is what you say.
Have you ever known people who can't celebrate anything?
Yeah.
I mean,
100%.
never,
Yeah,
you know?
there's always a discontentment. Yeah, we didn't do this, we didn't do that, as opposed to focusing on the good that happened. So if comparison kills joy, you make the comment that negativity kills potential. What do you mean by that when you say that we lose out on potential if this idea of criticism or negativity seeps in?
Well, so we just mentioned Act 6. Had they not resolved the issue with the widows, they could have destroyed the momentum of the church. It could have been that destructive, but they fixed it because they didn't marginalize the concern. They dealt with it. My favorite story is Nehemiah. He gets permission to go and rebuild the wall. So he gets to Home Depot, buys all the supplies. The architects, builders are on the way, and out of nowhere comes this critic. The Bible says his name was Sanballat, and his name actually means hatred in secret. But you notice his hatred really wasn't in secret. He was pretty bold about it. But the Bible says he just hated the well being of Israel. So he hates Israel so much that he doesn't want to see their wall rebuilt. It has nothing to do with him, but he hates them. And throughout the book of Nehemiah, he's constantly criticizing, he's mocking them. But what I appreciate is Nehemiah told the people, ignore it. Stay focused on the wall. Stay focused on the wall. And I thought, well, what would have happened if Nehemiah had said, hey, let's go fight him? And if you'll recall, Sanballat wants to meet in the valley of Ono and have a conversation with Nehemiah. And Nehemiah says, no to the valley of Ono. He says, we're going to waste our time. I just, preacher, man, do not allow yourself to be victimized. Do not allow your ministry to be marginalized by the Sanballat in your church. And there is going to always be one. Sometimes there's more than one, but I'm telling you, there's always going to be that one or two people who's well, their desire for the church to grow and flourish is not on their agenda. And I believe these are sons and daughters of disobedience. I think these can be tools of Satan. I really do. I think that Satan, grievous wolves will come in, Paul says to the elders at Ephesus, be careful. And so, but we got to learn, we can't just ignore them, but we can't let them detract us and steal our joy. And I've known too many preachers who've allowed one or two people to suck the joy out of their ministry, or a dysfunctional eldership or dysfunctional staff. And Satan wins when we let that happen. He wins when Sanballat gets the microphone.
Taking criticism is hard from people, especially people we think are on our team. And I really appreciate George Fall. I remember years ago listening to a sermon that George preached related to criticism. And he said, number one, consider, is the criticism true? Is it something that I could work on and change to make myself or the church better? If that's the case, then do that, but consider the source. There are people out there that are always going to try to tear you down, especially you're in a position of authority or leadership. Maybe there's some jealousy there. I had just started preaching, and it seemed like every week after the sermon, one of the men in the church would make a comment to me on his way out. It might have been the way I stated a word. Maybe I mispronounced something, or I misquoted a scripture. I used this word instead of that word. I said Paul instead of Peter, or Moses instead of Noah, whatever it was. Every week for a number of weeks on the way out, he would point out my mistakes to me. And I talked to Dick Chambers about this, a good friend of ours. And I said, Dick, here's what's going on. And I'll be honest with you, it's really tearing me apart. He said, here's what you do. Next time he comes down and he makes a comment to you about a negative thing that happened in your sermon, or a mistake that you made, respond in this way. Hey, I want to thank you for pointing that out to me. And I appreciate how often you do that, because every time you point out something I'm doing wrong, it's making me a better preacher. Okay.
And he
So
probably quit.
I did that. And he never, no joke, 20 years later, he has never criticized a sermon since.
We validate them when we react like
That's
children.
right.
So
And
I'm like, we can't afford to.
you're
You know
right.
what? I think
When
Casey Siegel once,
when we acknowledge that, hey, maybe you are helping me, that's good.
right.
They don't want to help us. That's not their
No,
intent.
not really. Not really.
Yeah.
And what did Casey Stengel once say? The key to successful leadership is keeping the people who hate you from the folks who are undecided. So I'm like, okay, I don't want to mess up the undecided. So I just got to, but I need to know my audience. So my wife and I, when we first got into ministry, I was 29, and we just had our first child, and so we started noticing that there were some real challenging people in the church. She said, okay, Jim, let's do this. Let's make a boat. We'll create a boat, and we'll decide who gets on the boat. And it's usually the critics, the crazies, the weirdos. We love them now. They're in the church. We love them. But so we had a boat, and it was like, I don't know, there was like 10 or 12 seats in it. And then we would say, okay, who's the captain? Well, we all know who the captain is. It's that one guy, okay. And Karen, she's the first mate. But what was funny, after 17 years of being in the church, we went from a boat to a yacht to a cruise ship, because it just, it kept getting bigger. But what it did was, and this is therapy. We laughed. It helped us cope. It was our coping mechanism. It was our therapy. And I'll tell you this, Dave, I'm not kidding you. It helped us cope, because we'd get home on Sunday evenings, and I'm like, and we would move them up the ranks. It's like, he's no longer the purser, he's the captain, because he's crazier than the old captain. Right? So we'd laugh, but we never stop loving it. I know it sounds like you can't love people. Oh, no, hey, it's the only way for the preachers to keep their sanity.
Yeah.
But I will tell you this, Dave, we just learned to find coping mechanisms for people who were challenging. And I'm telling you, it really, because we did it together as a team, Jeanette and I, because we laughed together, we suffered together. One other thing that I would challenge preachers to do, and this was hard when I first got in ministry with your critics, is long for them to leave. Be careful. Be careful that you don't get in the habit, preacher, of going, man, I wish that family would leave. Okay. Pray, I wish they would change, or pray that my attitude toward them would change. If you and I get in the habit of going, I wish they would leave. Okay, so the next family comes in, they become a challenge. I wish they would leave. And all of a sudden now you're celebrating people leaving. Now, I believe in church discipline. I understand that. I think there are times where parties do need to leave, but I just would caution preachers, don't celebrate it. Recognize it for what it is, pause, reflect. But I have watched guys high five their staff, high five when an elder leaves. And I realize that that's their emotions. There's what they're thinking is now my problems are gone away. What you just did is you celebrated someone that walked away from the church, and it's unfortunate, but just be careful that we don't celebrate it. Sometimes it has to happen. Sometimes church discipline has to happen. I just get nervous when I hear preachers talk amongst themselves like, I would kill to see those people leave. No, I would kill to see us come together, reason together, bring healing to the church, and move forward. That's what I would love to see.
Yeah, that's really good. And two comments on that, Jim. I think sometimes we view people that disagree with us as critics, and
Right.
not always the case. We probably need to stop looking at ourselves so much and thinking we have all the answers, because there's times we probably do need to just slow down, pony, and listen to what the person says. Second thing I wanted to say on this topic was oftentimes I've discovered that some of my biggest fans early on become my biggest critics later on.
Yes.
And they sort of believe and they're maybe manipulating the relationship in the situation at times, where early on they're like, that's the best sermon you ever preached. And I agree everything you said. And they're your biggest fan. I think I would just be cautious of those people and drawing them in
Absolutely.
close. We have
Absolutely.
to be careful there. So Jim, there's obviously people out in the church that we have to be aware of that can be critical and be negative as to the things that are going on. But what do we do when those people are on our leadership team? First as elders, and secondly, maybe even as staff. How do we handle those that are critical in our circle of leadership?
It becomes a lot more challenging if it's someone within the rank and file. Because we had a very large staff at Kissimmee, and then when we had the Christian school, it just tripled. And you say, well, the school, the church, but we're all in this big family. And even if they, so we all had to work together. And so I used to challenge our staff all the time. Look, you and I set the temperature for the attitude of this church. I said, so if you don't like the temperature of this church, you don't like the attitude of the people, then it's our job to change it. And I knew, and I used to tell our staff, if poison gets in the water in this staff and our eldership, it'll take a few days for that poison to get into the church. So we wouldn't put up with it. There is absolutely zero tolerance for that kind of toxicity within leadership. Absolutely cannot have it. It's one thing for the kids to act up, the members. It's another thing for the parents, elders, staff to act like children. Unacceptable.
That's really good.
Unacceptable.
That direct communication is so important in those situations, isn't it?
Well, I always thought, as my job as the preacher, I always felt like, Jim, if you don't like the tone, then you change it. If it's not good, then I need to fix it. I consciously, when I walked into the office, I consciously made sure that I walked in with a smile. We laughed immediately. We had a policy: all doors are open. You walk in and out of offices, group thinking, and just keep it light. But when it's time to get serious, be very serious. But I said, man, we have to work together. I said, we're with each other sometimes more than we are with our own family at times. So, how do we want this relationship to be? Healthy, loving, or toxic? We get to decide that.
What would you tell the preacher or the elder that maybe they look at themselves and they know that they're the negative one? Maybe after years of ministry, they've developed this hardness of heart, this resentment maybe toward people. The pressure is on them all the time. The stress is building up. The challenges of personal life, church life, all sort of collapse in on them. And then that guy becomes the one who's negative. Any advice you'd have for a fellow like that?
Yeah, and part of it is our fault. We had an elder, good man, but he was tired And after his term, he like, gentlemen, I really love to step down. And then we guilted him staying. Oh no, we love you. And we did. And so we just kept guilting him to stay on because we love him. We work together. You've been an elder for 300 years. And then I realized, and I told our elders long after that, we need to listen better. When an elder says, I'm tired, what he's really telling us, guys, there's some things maybe going on in my life. I need to step aside. David, I remember one time we had an elders meeting and I went in with an agenda. And I know that strikes you as odd that I would actually walk into an eldership with an agenda. And what I want to do is I wanted to revamp the cafeteria in our school building into 2 extra classrooms because our school is growing so fast. I said our kids can eat in their rooms. We're wasting. I don't need this cafeteria. One of the elders was vehemently opposed to doing that, but I had already campaigned and had the other 3 elders on my side. And I knew we all said we're not going to vote, so unanimous. But I thought, yeah, we say that, but if it comes down to a vote, you know what? I'm going to filibuster this baby. And so I said, call for a vote. And the 3 elders said, we agree with Jim. Let's make this classroom. The other elders like, that's how much you respect me. It's like, hey, 3-1, you lose. So the next day he calls me up and says, I'm resigning. I don't want to be the problem here. And I said, where are you? He said, I'm at my office. And there was a beautiful Sheraton hotel right across the street from his huge office in Orlando. And I could be there in about 10 minutes. I said, meet me at the Sheraton and let's get some coffee. So we sat there and he pushed his letter to me and he goes, this is my letter of resignation. And I said, okay. And I said, well, I tell you what, I'm pushing it back to you because I'm not going to accept it. Because here's what I am going to do though. I'm going to apologize for the way I acted. I'm not going to apologize for campaigning for turning that cafeteria to classrooms. I still think that's the best idea. But here's where I went wrong. I teamed up with the other guys and I fueled that. When I should have said, hey, our buddy here's not on board. So we've probably not done a good enough job of explaining it. And he withdrew his resignation. He is my best friend to this day. He's on the board of Advanced Center for Ministry Training. And I almost lost him. And I'll tell you what, our church would have lost a leader. And so swallow your pride, preacher. Literally, but listen when a man says, I'm tired. One more illustration. We had an elder who did not want to go into debt. We wanted to build we wanted to convert an insurance building to a school next door to our church. All the elders were on board but him. And he came to an elders meeting one day and we all loved him. Jeanette and I went on a cruise with him and his wife, best friends. And he said, I don't want to take this kind of loan out. And he said, I think I need to step down. And what he was saying is, if I stay on, I'm going to fight this loan. But I know you all want this loan and maybe we need this loan. But if I'm here, I'm the Jonah. And if you don't throw me overboard, this storm is going to constantly. And I remember shaking his hand and going, Mike, do you know what kind of courage it takes to say, I'm not in agreement. I'm never going to be in agreement, but I don't want to be the fly in the ointment. I don't want to be the Jonah that's going to keep this storm coming and wreck this ship. He transferred to another Christian church in the area. We remained best of friends. He asked me to have part in his wife's funeral long after he left the church. And here's what I realized. You know what? We can disagree without being disagreeable. Not everything has to end up in a barroom fight, you know? Sometimes we can just agree to disagree and part ways and be friends. So I didn't do it all right. I will tell you that. But I just learned some hills aren't worth dying on, and some people just need to be heard.
We can never lose sight that the agenda is not more important than people.
Absolutely.
You know, we talk a lot about being on mission, and being on mission isn't just about growth, it's about the people that are growing. And we can't throw people overboard. There are times maybe they need to get off the ship themselves.
Well,
There's
I agree. I agree.
some
And if they
people
can,
we in our minds put on the ship that maybe take us down a wrong path, the Karens, if you will. But we always
right.
have to remember that the mission involves people, and
Yes.
people are imperfect. They're going to be
Oh,
critical. They're going to be negative. They're going to compare, and that steals joy and momentum. And our goal is to keep onward toward the mission of Jesus Christ. So, Jim,
absolutely.
You know, you've accomplished a lot in your ministry. God's done a lot of great things through you. And there's one quality that you have that I think a lot of people would detect, and that's joy. So as we wrap up this episode, what would you say is one secret to living in joy in the midst of growth and change and striving toward the mission that God has called us to? What's the secret to joy for you?
So we had to become intentional about it. So I would tell the staff when we come into our staff meeting, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about what went right. Because I know that I knew we had, parking issues. I knew that the cop, the police officer had to escort somebody out. That happens. And I know that we could focus on that. But I said, let's celebrate everything. So I told them, celebrate the small things. And what ended up happening was we'd go around the table and we really didn't spend a lot of time talking about that cop that had to escort that guy out at 9:30 service, or the golf cart wouldn't start, so people had to walk through the rain. I knew that all happened. I knew that all happened. So we'll talk about that later. But let's celebrate everything we can. And I'm telling you, Dave, it was amazing on how many things really went well that Sunday that we would have never talked about if we had immediately gone to the 4 or 5 things that seemed that were the headliner. So I used to tell the staff, celebrate everything. So I would, I had this little thing I would do. I'd walk into staff meetings and I would clap. Every staff, I'd walk in, or I'd walk in the office and we just start clapping, or I'd walk up to the pulpit and clap and go, you're not going to believe what I got. And we celebrated everything. If there was a baptism, it was on Facebook within 30 minutes. Okay. I mean, and I would text the elders, hey guys, just so you know, it's 10:30 Monday night. And I know some of you are going to sleep, but somebody just got baptized in Celebrate Recovery. You guys just need to know this. This was a big night. So we purposely turned every day into a party. And I'm telling you, that helped me because I just there were so many challenges going on in my own life in ministry. And when you're trying to raise kids and it's not a psychological thing. It's not that. It's just conditioning yourself to make a joyful noise unto the Lord all the time. And I told our staff, that's how we're going to operate around here. And if you want to be negative and critical, there's probably another church that's looking for you. It doesn't work here. And so it was, but that's how I operated. It just worked. I survived. I'm probably going to go crazy at some point, but I did survive.
Love it. It's easy for those in ministry to allow the challenges, the stresses, the people to really oppress us, and that becomes joy stealers for us.
Oh,
We've just got to live in the joy of Christ and keep pressing forward, overlooking and understanding there's criticism and comparing in a positive way to the churches maybe that we're seeking to emulate a little bit. But I really appreciate that, Jim. That was good. And I need to clap and laugh a little bit more.
I know. And I got silly crazy with it, and it got to be a routine. And it was just what I did. But I just wanted 8:30 in the morning. Let's make this the best Monday we could ever make it. Let's make it the best Tuesday. So I just, that's how we did it, man.